All right, we have officially started our, I think this is our third Slam Hangout. Man, time flies. I also don't think you can say man. I think that's sexist in 2016. We're going to go through introductions from my left to right. I'm sure I'm going to skip you, though, because we're going to come back to you in a second. I see Jeff, and then I'm going to say the order. That way people we're going to go through introductions from my left to right. I'm sure I'm going to... All right, I'm back. I had a window open with my own video playing. Very terrifying. So I'm going to now do introductions now that I've fixed technical difficulties on my side. So I'm going to go with Jeff, then Kelly, then Nicole, then Raul, then Rick, then Robin, and Vaughn. I'm sure you'll all remember that order. My name's Antero Garcia. I am the president and slightly disorganized member of SLAM, the Studies of Literacy and Multimedia Assembly for NCTE, and Colorado State, where it's starting to cool down a little bit. You see seasons turning. If I wasn't colorblind, the leaves would look different. Jeff, where are you and how are your seasons today?
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, good. I'm Jeff Scher, and I work at UCLA in the teacher education program. And we don't really have seasons out here. It's just kind of hot, and right now it's, I guess, the humid season. I'm a little under the weather, actually, speaking of seasons. But all else is good.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I hope you're feeling better soon. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Keene, and I'm new to the Slam chat, so you'll forgive my wonkiness as I work my way through this. I am a professor at a community college in northern New Jersey. I'm about 15 minutes outside of New York City, and I'm a doctoral student at Teachers College, Columbia, and my dissertation is all about writing and digital writing and those kinds of things, so I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Nicole.
Hey everybody, I'm Nicole Mira. I'm the membership coordinator of SLAM, so if you know any folks that need to know how to get involved, let me know. I'm also an assistant professor of English education at the University of Texas at El Paso. It's very warm here.
Awesome. Raul? Raul, can you hear us? Do you wanna introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Raul A. Mora, associate professor of English education and literacy studies at the Universidad Bolivariana in Medellin, Colombia, and I also chair the Literacy in Second Languages project. So I'm really all about how to explore 21st century literacies in the area of second languages. And the weather here, we're in the tropics, so it's always warm.
It's very different. Rick.
Hi, I'm Rick Beach, University of Minnesota retiree, and it's actually warm in Minneapolis, where I reside. I was just out in Colorado, which was beautiful, with a meeting with Otero. I just posted an article by Raul about multimodal tools in pre-service English education. I also am posting some links to some of my own work in multimodal text. So looking forward to talking about that topic.
Thanks, Rick. It's good to see you again, but this time in digital form. Robin.
On my screen, Vaughn's next. Okay, I'm Robin Seglem. I am the vice president, I guess is what we call it, of SLAM, helped Ontero form this group. I'm from Illinois State University, where Cheryl used to be, and she deserted us. So we'll let her introduce where she's at here in a moment. But looking forward to talking to all of you. And it's hot here right now.
Excellent. Vaughn.
Hi, everyone. Vaughn Watson. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Teacher Education at Michigan State. And my first time joining you, and looking forward to being in conversation with everyone.
Good to see you, Vaughn. Vaughn was my roommate for the NCTE New Voices. We were the only men in our cohort that year, so he's always stuck with me. It's great. Anyways, gonna stop there. Cheryl, thank you for joining us. Can you give us a slightly extended biography of who you are, why you desert certain places, and weather, and all of that stuff?
Of course, happy to. Thank you all for having me here tonight. So yes, I deserted Illinois State, but that was not the first place that I deserted. So tracing my biography back a little bit, I was born and raised in Virginia, and I left there to do my PhD in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at Michigan Tech. And when I finished there, I took my first tenure track job in Utah at Utah State University. And I was there for 3 years, and the mountains were lovely, but it wasn't quite the right programmatic fit for me. I wanted to do more multimodal composition, which I couldn't really do there. So I left to go to Illinois State University, where I was in the English Studies program there, which was a wonderful program for a really long time until, you know, administration happens. And then it was not so wonderful. So I decided to pursue more research opportunities, actually. And I did a year in Norway as a Fulbright, working at the School of Architecture and Design in Oslo. And after that, I came back and started as an associate professor of digital publishing studies in the English department at West Virginia University, where I am now. So I'm part in the English department, but also this year I became director of the new Digital Publishing Institute, which is based out of the libraries at WVU. So I have a joint appointment between the College of Arts and Sciences and the university library. And all the while, I'm still doing work in Norway. I have a shared research project that I work on. I'm actually leaving Friday to go back for a couple of days. And meanwhile, I still edit the journal Kairos, which I've been an editor of for the last 15 years. And I'm very proud of the fact that we just published our 20th anniversary issue this past January.
So I know, congratulations. I know we want to spend a little bit of time talking about what Kairos means and kind of digital publishing and where that goes, as well as multimodality. Do you have a preference of kind of which path we start with? No. Okay. Well, then I will make an executive decision then. Maybe in case members don't know, could you share a little bit about what Kairos is and what it's been doing for the past handful of years?
Yes, and sorry I keep muting and unmuting, but I can't find my earplugs, so I'm trying to avoid the feedback. So Kairos is a journal that has always and only published online. We have always published, one of the phrases that you'll hear these days is scholarly multimedia. It's hard for me to say that, scholarly multimedia. Kairos calls them web texts, which is much easier to pronounce. And web texts are scholarly articles if you reimagine them as interactive websites. So they're full of digital media content, but they also have literature reviews, that sort of thing. And they're peer reviewed. We have a very rigorous peer review process. And the subtitle of the journal is Rhetoric, Technology, and Pedagogy. So you can imagine, you know, NCTE audience members and readers form a big part of our author pool from the people who publish. We don't do a whole lot of K-12 crossover. The audience tends towards university writing instructors who teach with digital media and digital technology, but we've done some special issues with folks who are doing English education or different, you know, broadened versions of education. And we try to branch out whenever possible to create collaborations between the different constituencies who might be interested in Kairos, whether it be an NCTE audience or a digital humanities audience, or we've been getting, in part because of my relationship with Norway and the design school there, a lot of communication design types of stuff coming down the pike. So it's a good mishmash. And we say the rule of thumb is if it's rhetoric, technology, and pedagogy, you have to do 2 of the 3, and one of them has to be technology. So that's the caveat. It has to have something to do with digital communications, multimedia, and multimodality, even in its analog form, falls under that banner. So so that's the short version of Kairos. And I could, as I told Antero earlier, I could talk for hours about Kairos. So any questions that you have. Oh, but I do want to throw out the option. We have this, you know, we help authors publish these interactive multimedia web texts that are peer-reviewed, but a lot of authors, especially first-time authors, don't have the facility to design web texts on their own, because it is incumbent on the author to create a design that's going to enact the rhetorical argument of the author's work. So we have this other section that we created to sort of as a gateway for authors into the journal, and it's called the Praxis Wiki. And so everything we publish there, it's shorter form articles, linear style articles. They might have some hyperlinks to external sites. They might have some multimedia components like a video or images thrown in there, but it's essentially a short article about a teaching practice. And we peer review those as well. So that it has a whole separate editorial board and publishes on a rotating basis, a rolling basis. So anytime we get a submission in, we can push it through peer review and out to publication, usually within 2 or 3 months. It's fairly quick, if the revision process is quick. Yeah.
That's lightning speed, I think, in the world of academic publishing. I guess I'm wondering, so having sat on the Committee on Libraries here at Colorado State, journal subscriptions cost a lot. And so there's been a shocker, right, for people who are wondering. But I think we've been increasingly trying to figure out, what are the pathways towards open access? What are the affordances of distribution? And so maybe both in your capacity with Kairos and in thinking about digital publishing broadly, do you see changes in how the system's moving forward, or even the pressures on capacity on Kairos' side in terms of finding those matchmaking, moving things through Praxis, the speed of peer review? I feel like that's 18 questions at once. This is also a 3-hour meeting instead of an hour.
So yeah, I mean, in writing studies, we have the benefit of having more practice, more experience than anybody out there doing this kind of scholarly multimedia work. In terms of the research output as a peer-reviewed artifact, we've been doing it longer than anybody else has been doing it. And so that's given us the benefit of longevity and the benefit of time to reflect on what these processes should look like and how that relates to how we might archive and keep our scholarly record intact, which can be a problem. And it's a problem with a lot of our other online journals in the field. And it's something that I'm trying to help other editors and publishers think about a lot. And that's partly my role within the Digital Publishing Institute in the libraries, is to think large scale about these things. So how do I take the processes that we've installed with Kairos that allows us to maintain every piece that might go into a web text, because it might be 5 or 6 HTML pages and 6 or 7 JPEGs and 2 movie files and 2 CSS files, and they all have to go through the system, linked. So through our practice, we've come up with some best practices for how to do that. And I've been using those best practices to create a new publishing platform called Vega. And it's this research grant that I have with Norway. I collaborate with a design team over there to build this new publishing platform, or a submissions management system, if you're familiar with those, that will help teach other publishers and editors and authors how to compose multimedia scholarship or creative texts, if they're more creative writers on that end of things, to compose it, to edit it, like how to successfully peer review it, and then how to publish it in a way that's sustainable for the long term, and ideally in a way that's open access, that's not going to cost anybody any money. And there's so many different ways that people can claim open access these days. Kairos is the premier model, I'm grateful to say, because we don't charge authors anything to publish in there, and we don't charge any readers to read anything in there. So it's a Libra model. It's a free model of totally free open access. And there's a bunch of different variations of open access off of that, many of which charge authors to not to submit. If somebody outside of creative writing is asking you to pay money to submit, then they're doing it wrong. It's predatory. But to pay to have your work published once it's accepted for peer review, that's one standard of open access that in the humanities, I still find pretty iffy because we're not making grant money like the sciences are, and that's the model that's usually used in the sciences, these article processing charges, APCs. But my hope with Vega is that we can make the process easy enough by providing a platform that is accessible enough that we don't necessarily need to charge APCs, or that, you know, individual editors and publishers can make that decision, but maybe make it less than they would need to be, that some of the big commercial publishers like Elsevier and whatnot are charging. They charge upwards of, some of them $3,500 to publish one article as an open access article on their website, which is just outrageous to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think this has been a real question here. Rick, I think you have a question in the group chat. Do you want to vocalize it?
Yeah, one clear advantage of these online digital publications is I think the issues of length, which sometimes can be a problem with journals, I think goes away because you can put in links, or you can just link to additional text. So my question is, with Kairos, are there issues around length, or how do you sort of, you know, work through that so the text doesn't go on for years and, you know, hours and hours, versus, yeah, you just link to some stuff and people can make their own choices about, you know, looking at additional stuff. So how do you deal with length issues?
That's a great question. And there's a couple of different ways to approach that question, actually. So length is still an issue for a digital journal, unbeknownst to most digital journal editors, actually, because of the time it takes to process something through the copy editing and production system. So the rule of thumb that we've developed at Kairos is we've come up with sort of an average number of web texts that we can publish every issue, because that's all of the human resources that we have, the human capital that we have who can copy edit the texts given our production cycle, because we only publish twice a year for the regular issues. We just had to hire 5 new assistant editors who will become copy editors for the Praxis Wiki, because since they're publishing on a different cycle, you know, and they were publishing longer pieces, that impacted the way that we were able to push those through the system. So we needed more people. So length isn't always in relation to human capital, first of all. Second of all, length is a rhetorical issue, right? So part of what the peer reviewers do, and part of what my job as editor is to consider, how much does the author actually need to say, and what's the scope of what their argument is. I often tell authors, as a rule of thumb, you know, if you're facile enough with writing a 25-page, you know, double-spaced article for college English or something, cut your concept by a third, right? Or into thirds, and take like 1/3 of that concept and then reimagine what that should look like in multimedia. Because the amount of work that you're going to put into the multimedia is the intellectual equivalent of, by the end of it, having a full-length article, right? So the length of people's arguments should become shorter, although they haven't always. And so that leads to my third point, which is my third and final point on this issue, which is authors don't often take that advice. And so we end up with pieces that are twice as long as they need to be, 3 times as long as they need to be. We published a piece a year or so ago by, I think his name is Fred Johnson. I'm terrible with names, I apologize. But it was a piece called Perspicuous Objects, and it was a comic studies piece. And that piece was essentially 3 web texts in one. And in fact, we pulled a bunch of the content to submit it to the Best of Independent Journals anthology, and it ended up being, I think, 72 single-spaced pages of content. Just ridiculous. But the way that he had designed it cohered enough that I was like, this is impressive. But I told him, I said, look, the authors retain the rights on Kairos. It would be terrible of me to say, you can only publish this in Kairos and only get credit for this. What I like for one article, essentially, one peer-reviewed article. And so when it comes to length, where the length is actually needed in order to achieve some sort of scope, I often encourage authors to either break up their pieces, even publish them simultaneously within Kairos within the same issue, but peer review them separately and then link them together. Or I will, like in one particular case, it needed to go together as a single piece, but I called it out as 2 separate pieces in the table of contents so that the author could get credit for 2 articles in his tenure case. Or in the case of the Perspicuous Objects, the comics piece, I recommended that he publish it as a short monograph with another press, because they retain their rights and they can republish it anywhere as long as they credit Kairos. So sort of 3 different perspectives on the length issue.
Nicole, you want to jump in with your question?
Sure. I was just curious about your peer review process, and if during the peer review, I know that there's different parts of the journal. Some are not peer-reviewed scholarly work, others are. For the part that is scholarly peer-reviewed, to what extent are you taking into account both the scholarly ideas and methods and the traditional things we think about with academic research? And then to what extent is the actual use of digital innovation an important point to getting the work published? So I'm thinking of it as someone working with high school students, and some of the basic tools that are out there that are free, like Weebly. You can create a website, you can put videos and tweets and information in one place. It's not necessarily technologically advanced. It's not doing something really completely new with technology, but it is a step toward putting different modes together. And I'm wondering if that's something that you take, like, do you have to be on the cutting edge of understanding technology to be able to put a piece together that you're gonna like?
That's a great question. And I had a really simple answer for you until you said one word: innovation. And then all bets were off. So then here's the long response, because when it comes to the design, 100% of the peer review is looking at the scholarly argument and the design and how that fits together, okay? But when you're talking about design innovation, that's something else. Very, very few pieces that Kairos publishes are innovative in their designs. And that's simply because, like, you know, how many geniuses are there in the world, right? So statistically speaking, we just don't get that many pieces that really make me go, wow, they're doing something wholly new that I've never seen before, or that we've never seen within this context. And if we do see that, then I'm all over that piece, right? Like, oftentimes I'll handhold it through the peer review process. And, you know, because I'm the editor and I can. Because a lot of times if a piece is so new and so innovative, in fact, I just wrote an article about this, so I'll have to send it to you. If it's so new and so innovative, sometimes even the board members they forget to recognize that that's the wrong way to say it. It so surprises us that we don't know how to react to it sometimes, right? And so oftentimes those pieces need a little more hand-holding. That's not to say they need revision or that they do get special treatment, but editors invite pieces all the time, so that's not that big of a deal. Now, when it comes to the barrier to submitting work, Kairos has gotten a lot more selective over the years, and that's been both good and bad for us. It's been good for us because we're now recognized as the leading digital writing studies journal. So that's a good thing reputationally for all the authors who have published in us, because it means that the peer review means something for their tenure cases, if they're a tenure line, or if they're on the job market or something. But it also then means that people are afraid to submit work to us because they don't feel like they can reach some bar. So what a lot of authors do is start out with those ubiquitous web technologies like Weebly or WordPress. Up until very recently, we have 3 rounds of peer review, and I can talk about that in a minute, but we would look at pieces, like in the first round of review, at something made in WordPress, and we would even send a WordPress piece through peer review. We would not look at anything made in Weebly or Wix, which is all listed in our submission guidelines, because those particular programs don't allow you to export the HTML and do anything with it. It has to live on their site. And because of our sustainability requirements, our preservation requirements, that, like, the authors can't ever retrieve their work. So I tell teachers, when it comes to multimodal composition, it's fine if you want to use that stuff, but just know that your students are never going to be able to do anything with that work. right? Because it's always going to live on the Weebly server, and that just does a disservice to the students in the long run. So we don't even look at stuff like that. And very recently, we would take WordPress stuff, but we've stopped doing that for the most part because authors, we realized the authors were using WordPress because they didn't know how to write in HTML, but so they weren't using the technology in a rhetorical way, right? They were using WordPress as a container, and then we would go in and scrape it. And because we knew if they're doing that, they don't know how to scrape a website. So we would go in and scrape it for them and redo all the information architecture because we edit the code, right? We edit the designs and the code. So it's quite an intensive process. And it became too much work for us. We don't have the time. I have 35 staff members, and we still don't have the time to handle a piece that's done in WordPress. So we won't take it anymore, which, yes, it's a barrier, but that's when we encourage people to collaborate, work with undergraduates who do know some HTML or are willing to learn, or work with your information technology specialists on campus. Or if you have a DH center, if you're lucky enough to have one, then usually they can help. Or if you have educational technology specialists on campus, then they can help. But we don't let we don't want the technology to prohibit somebody from entering the space that is Kairos. But it's also, okay, rhetoric, technology, pedagogy, 2 of the 3, and one of them's got to be tech, right? So it is a bar, but that's fine, because if they don't want to design something, there's 6 other journals they can submit to that don't require them to design something that's still online and open access.
So Cheryl, and I want to get back to Raul's question in a second too, but I want to ask a linking question to your piece on multimodality that you shared with us. And so particularly thinking about Weebly and I guess proprietary composition tools. So I think one of the big challenges with all media being multimodal, with all writing being multimodal essentially, is certain tools in particularly Web 2.0 or whatever we call it these days, contexts, are that some of those tools are inherently more proprietary and kinds of critical literacies in how we teach around them. Is that something you're seeing in how you're thinking about multimodality or how you're teaching with it?
Can you rephrase that question?
I'm probably gonna blow it. I guess I'm thinking about, so I've definitely worked with students where Weebly is a tool that they use, right? Or Nings are a thing that are regularly utilized, right? And then there's, a Blogger versus WordPress conversation that goes on. And I use Facebook with my own students, right, in teaching different novels in the high school classroom. But what I didn't do oftentimes in those classrooms is talk about, who owns those media and what kinds of limitations happen with the archive or with the cost down the road, or how am I a product as a part of that production? Maybe I'm answering my own question.
Okay, I see where you're going now. All right, so. Yes, all of those things are like, to even begin the conversation is a good thing, right? But this is an anecdote. So y'all may know I wrote a textbook. I co-authored a textbook with 2 of my friends from grad school. It's called Writer Designer, a guide to making multimodal projects. And it's a sweet, short little textbook. And it came out a year or so ago. And the final chapter, chapter 8, is called something like The Afterlife of Multimodal Projects. And the whole chapter is about metadata and sustainability and what happens to your project when class is over, and what happens to your project 5 years from now, and what if you're working on a client-based project in a service learning class, like how do you need to transfer that information over to the actual client who might sustain this project? And so it has all these very practical future casting types of questions. And the feedback that we got from most of the users that we've surveyed as we sort of consider, revising it for the 2nd edition, is that they're like, why would we ever teach that in first year comp, for instance? Why would we ever talk about like what's going to happen afterwards? And it struck me that, yeah, sure, they don't necessarily think that that's going to be useful to the students, but so I ended up in revising the table of contents, because obviously I think that stuff's very important. It forms the core of everything that I think about with Kairos, right? And everything that I do goes back to Kairos as a model, which is kind of crazy, but also it's been around for 20 years and it's the longest running thing in our field that's anything like it. So it's a good example, right? And so when I thought and thought about how we might revise the textbook, I made it the first chapter. I'm like, we're not gonna push this away, and we're not gonna hide it in the closet. We're gonna deal with this front and center so that people understand why we're talking about metadata, why the little descriptions that you put in your YouTube videos for your class need to point back somewhere else, right? That they can be collective. Or if you want to maintain the class archive, who owns that video? And does the student have a copy and the teacher have a copy, or the program have a copy, or something like that. So we hopefully, like, my goal is to foreground and really push on those questions so that people will start asking more and more, okay, why are we using this tech? And who's going to be using it after us?
Thank you. Thank you for trying to make sense of my question. I appreciate it.
I hope that answered your question.
That was really helpful. Raul, do you want to get back to, and so I'll say we probably have about 10 more minutes of time, and Cheryl, thank you for your time. And we still have the multimodal, I think by starting with Kairos, I opened the Pandora's box of all these interesting questions for researchers. And I'm trying to also get to some of those practitioner questions also. But Raul, do you want to ask your peer review question, and other people, I'll just open up. I don't want to call on people.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So my question has to do with the challenge of getting peer reviewers on board. I mean, one thing is having a conversation among the 7 of us, because in a way you're preaching to the choir. I mean, we all believe in multimodality. We've all embraced it as part of our practice, but not everyone. As I kind of mentioned in the chat, I plugged in the on the chat section. Not everybody has embraced it, especially like in writing studies or in certain areas of even language arts. Not everybody is fully on board with multimodality. So how do we create that culture? And I'm thinking about not just Kairos, but also how do we extend it to other journals around the world, so we can really get peer reviewers to understand the importance of this new framework when it comes to reviewing the articles. Because one thing is reviewing a monomodal print-based text. Another thing is when you have to bring all the little variables and all the semiotic resources that are involved in multimodality. So what's your take on that particular issue?
Ooh, that's a big, juicy question. So if I understood correctly, you're wanting me to answer that in relation to how other journals and peer reviewers might be more welcoming to multimodal texts in sort of any format for around the world. And it's the same way that I would think about how discussions of multimodality would have to happen in programs and in classrooms. And that's, first of all, for us to stop using the word monomodal, because there is no such thing. Every text on the planet is multimodal, right? And we can very easily look at a seminar paper that a student has written or an article that a scholar has written and point out all of the multimodal qualities of it, right? The visual layout, the spatiality of it, the white space that's being used, whether the headers are doing some sort of visual emphasis or not, that sort of thing. And so then you start adding in the images, static images or graphs or charts or things like that, that can still run in a linear, framed article. And thinking about how those might be better constructed, right? And I think we do some of that already as peer reviewers. If we get a piece where the graph is just, it's a pie chart, let's say, and the percentages are wrong or we can't read the text in it, we're going to point that out as a reviewer. But from the larger perspective, and this is a perspective that writing studies has had the benefit of, there is a social value to that work, right? There's a scholarly value to visual and multimodal rhetorics, and there's a social value that has to happen within a discipline. And those values, never mind the technological values, which was what Nikki was asking about, right? But if we start just by approaching editors and saying, we want to see more photos, you know, if it's just that, or we want to see more student videos or, you know, scholarly videos in our journals, how can we promote that value? How can we create that scholarly infrastructure that allows us to socially accept these pieces through peer review? Or just start your own journal. Which is, of course, a lot more difficult said than done. Or a lot easier said than done, yeah.
They made it sound so easy. Other people have just general questions, or even questions for the group at large around either digital publishing, multimodality, starting your own journal. I'm gonna vamp for a second as people.
If not, I have a question for them.
Oh, that'd be great. Go for it.
Is there anything that I've said today that you were like, what? What is she talking about? Like, no, I don't agree with that, or that would never fly, or something like that?
Let me jump in. And more that actually makes me what you think what you're saying is more of a challenge, because when we were talking about the start your own journal, actually I've been commissioned to take be the editor-in-chief of the journal of my school education beginning sometime in the near future. I don't know exactly when. But one of the things I'm thinking about is how to revamp the journal. So now, listening to what you were saying about the multimodal element, it's making me now, okay, how can I bring this into a journal that's in South America that we are trying to, you know, show and actually showcase more to the world? Because that could be the other issue. How can we implement those elements? Because one thing is implementing it when you have in the US, we have access to a grant to Norway. Another thing is when we try to implement that in South America, where resources are substantially more limited. I mean, in terms of, let's say, economic capital, not so much in terms of cultural and social capital, because we have really good people here trying to do wonderful things. So I think what you actually post for me is a challenge of how I can embrace some of those ideas into the revamping journal.
Yeah, so that's part of why so I went to Norway for the year in order to help them build a journal like Kairos for the field of design studies. And you'd think, like Scandinavia, rich in resources, but not rich in human capital, because they truly only work a 36-hour work week, which kind of shocks us as those of us living in the Americas, but that's what they do. And so I realized we couldn't start a journal like that over there for them because there was no one to run it, right? It was not a labor of love for them. It was a practicality. And that's why we started Vega, the new platform, so that we could start making this process a lot easier for other editors around the world to be able to start up this stuff. So it won't be out till next week, but I've put a link to this thing called Kairos Camp in the comments. And the website's just kairos.camp. And it is an NEH-funded workshop for authors who want to author web texts, and it's all free, all paid for them for 2 summers. And there's a separate workshop for editors who want to learn how to start up and edit and publish and preserve digital media content as part of their publishing venues. So you should apply to come to that, and we can talk more about it.
That's awesome. We have maybe 5 more minutes of Cheryl's time. I also just made that up. Hopefully I have 5 more minutes of your time, Cheryl. Does anyone have other questions? There's been a lot of interesting stuff happening in the group chat, so I'm probably missing stuff, so I'm gonna pause.
Well, I guess the question I'm thinking about is really a question and a possibility. And Cheryl, just really thinking about how you're really pushing me to think about the broadened possibilities for other and additional voices in the scholarly work. So thinking about whether it's teachers, educators beyond school, community-based educators, youth, and just thinking about ways through and with these type of publication possibilities, we can really build upon participatory approaches all the way through the not just the data collection and data analysis, but how we share the research, how do we share the work with youth, and what it means to think about youth and our community collaborators as co-authors. And I guess coupled with that, a question would be just in terms of readers thinking about, can you chat a bit about how folks within educational research and outside of as well and beyond are perhaps taking up ideas in these texts which have a different type of accessibility than a journal that we often may think of?
Yeah, I don't say it blithely when I say that scholarly multimedia and open access publishing enacts a social justice mission for knowledge building in the world, right? And I'm very attentive of people in the local community. I mean, I'm living in an incredibly poor, depressed, rural area, right? And so now I have this population that I'm like, okay, how will these students who are going to go back to Greenbrier County, who just had their homes flooded out, how are they going to continue to build knowledge once they leave, right? Or, I was up in Detroit at Wayne State visiting a couple weeks ago and talking with colleagues there about how do we build a pipeline for kids in the 6 through 12 or even K-12 who might be interested in going into publishing themselves or librarianship, particularly when they're from underrepresented populations, because publishing is really white, right? So for me, it all comes together in this moral obligation, I guess I could say, about publishing multimedia artifacts isn't the same as providing a 5-page literature review. And that's a damn good thing, because we don't need just the 5-page lit review. We need these other kinds of artifacts. Do you all remember that Michael Wesch video from like 7-8 years ago? Yeah, some of y'all, I can't remember the name of it, something about students today. And it caught on like wildfire, right? It had like 2 million views within a year. And it was just, a digital anthropology professor working with his students to create a digital video about, what students know in the world now. And that struck me at the time because I said, what is that video doing? And published on YouTube, just under the guy's own account, what is it doing that scholarly multimedia doesn't do, but could do? And it was a question that I brought to my students in my multimedia authoring undergraduate classes at the time. I said, okay, what is it about digital media and social media that you value that you can bring into your scholarship, and how can we combine these things? It doesn't have to live in Kairos or Computers and Composition Online or Enculturation or one of the other journals that publishes web texts in order for it to make an impact in the world, right? It can be on your meme page or on Tumblr or on Instagram or wherever, but like, what is the thought process that we're putting into that? I don't know if any of that was coherent, but but that's what I felt impassioned to say from your question.
We might have time for maybe one last quick question, if someone has one.
I guess I would just quickly ask if anyone has resources or ways to get educators and teacher educators and design thinkers and the more tech savvy folks to all get together to have these conversations that I feel don't happen enough. So if anyone has ideas for places or ways we can create mini courses or more ways to talk across these boundaries, I think it's still, I hear educators having different conversations than I hear design thinkers having, and I feel like there's so much that overlaps, but it's difficult to get everyone in the same room or in the same even digital space, or to use the same language to have this conversation in ways that speak to both like high school students and teachers and academics and folks out in the field doing this work with technology. And I guess maybe that's work for our assembly.
I have a great resource for you that involves money. In other words, people sending you money to do this.
if y'all haven't looked into the Institute for Museum and Library Science, IMLS, is a federal granting agency, and they often work with NEH, especially the Office of Digital Humanities. But IMLS has planning grants that they give away that are up to like $100,000. They're pretty significant. And the NEH office also has their startup grants. They've renamed them advancement grants or something, but their level 1 grants also support planning stages. But the IMLS grants have a little bit more money, and they're also purposefully intended to get to that sort of community outreach. So if you can involve K-12 people and digital and humanist people and design people and librarians, because they're so instrumental in all of this, and educators and, you know, the public in some form or fashion, they will throw money at you. Okay, maybe that shouldn't be on a live thing, but like there is money for that, and that would be a good thing for this group to pursue, I think. A worthwhile venture that would bring people together. But I want to thank y'all so much for having me in to chat with you. These sessions are pretty cool. I'm gonna have to look into more of them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
really
so much.
I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to jump into going over just election stuff so I can get us out of here by 5 o'clock my time. Cheryl, you're welcome to stay for the boring election-y stuff, or I won't be offended if you disappear in a second. But I do really want to thank you for all the various resources. And I'm going to point people to your website also, if that's okay. I think there's some really useful stuff there that I got as I was stalking in preparation for today. Perfect, there it is. I feel less stalkery in having that link there. So really quickly, we have to have our first election. So in starting SLAM, I just got appointed to be president. It's great, it's the easiest thing ever. But now we need to actually have elections. And so we're gonna do it and I'm hoping that those of you on this call are people who would be interested in these positions, except for Rick, and there's a caveat for why not, and I'll explain that in a second. So we have 6 elected positions. We have 3 board members, and then we have three board members at large, and then we have a treasurer, secretary, and vice president, and the vice president becomes the president through some metamorphosis process. Rick is currently a board member at large, and his term is going to extend for another year. So I'm hoping he won't abandon that term, although I guess he could, and we'll stay on and kind of continue helping with our leadership throughout the year. So what we're expecting is this year we're going to elect for secretary, treasurer, VP, and next year we'll elect 3 at-large board members to have some consistency of who's the leadership for SLAM in any given year. So just briefly, the president just does all of this stuff. There's a longer description I'll put in later. The secretary keeps minutes and records, and the treasurer keeps budget and manages assembly funds. We also have other positions and committee positions that some of you on this call are a part of, and those were appointed, and so the president and vice president are able to make those appointments. And if you need to step away, I know like Frankie, as she is becoming the incoming NCTE vice president, is going to step down from her convention coordinator role, for example, and those kind of make sense. So just some deadlines. I have a Google form for the nomination process, and I'm highly encouraging all of you and everyone on our SLAM membership list to self-nominate. You can also recommend people who are non-SLAM members to nominate themselves, but they'll need to be a SLAM member by the time they become in the leadership position, right? So if you know of people who would be a good fit for this, but they just haven't had the time or opportunity, they just need to join by January 1st. So nominations, enroll, I see your comment. I'm gonna share the link in a newsletter email on Friday. And so starting then, you can nominate yourself or someone else between now and October 31st. That'll be the nomination period. We will then have and then I will share out who is nominated by October 31st. And you will then have the opportunity to elect for those 3 positions, secretary, treasurer, vice president, basically the week before and week after NCTE. That way we can make an announcement in person and online. So November 14th through the 28th will be our election period. I will announce who our new leadership folk are on December 1st, and your term is a calendar year starting January 1st, if that makes sense. All of these details will be back in the SLAM newsletter that I will send out on Friday. I'm gonna check in for questions in a second. The other thing I'll just say, since I have the date on the same sticky note here, is that our next meeting, Rob and I are trying to figure out what times are working. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm glad many of you are here. But we're gonna do our next SLAM Hangout on Wednesday, October 19th, so just a little less than a month from now, at 6:30 Eastern time. So trying to play around to see if we can get some more West Coast folks, if maybe it's too early in the day for them. So again, that'll also be in the newsletter, but just throwing it out now since I see that I have it here. I think I threw out a whole bunch of information. I really do want to encourage all of you to apply. Robin, as our vice president, will become our president as of January 1st. And that means she's not allowed to leave these meetings early. That is a vice presidential perk that she's taken advantage of today. Any questions I can answer or other things related to election or officially SLAM stuff?
You're muted.
I was just confirming I will spontaneously combust. So I'm glad I unmuted to respond to your comment. If there's not any other comments, so I will say the reason we had Cheryl on today, other than I took a lot from that conversation, was looking at the kinds of interests from all of you on our past calls. There's an interest in hearing from elementary ed, so we really pushed to get Frankie to speak. And from there, thinking through modes of what's happening at higher ed and other kinds of spaces for digital publishing. And I think Cheryl was really able to speak to that. She's, just a huge expert in that area. So I feel really fortunate to have the opportunity. So if there's things that all of you are interested in hearing for that October Hangout, I know it's also the Connected Learning Month, and so we're going to look at writing practices and digital stuff then as well. But if you have a specific topic or a specific speaker, I have some stuff in mind. But feel free to just send me a note or a tweet or a thing, however you want to communicate, that works. Last call for questions before I click the digital gavel in a second. All right, well, it is good to see all of you. I will hopefully see all of you within a month, and I'm hoping to see all of you nominate yourselves and your colleagues. I think that common refrain, nominate early and nominate often, is in effect here for our SLAM elections. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you soon. Have a great day, everybody.